The Church of Our Fathers by Roland H. Bainton. We continue with chapter 22, A New World. Some of his companions were frightfully tortured and killed. His life was spared because the Mohawks wanted him in bargaining with the French, but while sparing his life, the Indians tore out his fingernails, cut off his left thumb, and reduced some of his fingers to stumps. At night, he was chained on the ground, while Indian children put hot coals on his body. At last, he was rescued by the Dutch and was given the kindest care by a Presbyterian minister, Father Jagu, then went home to France, and on Christmas Day, at least that which is observed as Christmas, saw his mother again. But he longed to return to the Mohawks, who had treated him so ill. "If I'm employed in this mission," he wrote, "my heart tells me I shall not return. It will be well for me if God will be pleased to complete the sacrifice where he began it. If the little blood which I shed there in that land will be accepted by him as a pledge, that I would willingly shed all. Our good master, who gained this people for himself by his own blood, may open to it the door of the gospel." Brother Jacques returned to fall under a tomahawk. Now, if what's called the Old Testament is true, nobody can pay the sin burden of another. Or, those parts of it anyways. And even the words of Jesus. You can help people escape and save their life in this life, but it's Paul that came up with this doctrine. It's not really attributed to Jesus in the Bible. The Dutch, to save him on an earlier occasion, were colonists, one group among the many that filled up the Atlantic seaboard during the 17th century of the Common Era. The colonists came to the New World only in part for reasons of religion. Some wished a place where they might worship God as they thought right. Others were looking for a chance to make an easier living. But whatever the reason, most of them carried over the idea that only one religion could be allowed in one place. In most of the colonies, church and state were united, and only that form of Christianity that was united with the state was permitted. Now, one of the great truths is that regardless of your type of government, those in power are acting according to their beliefs. But any semblance of a theocracy still could allow other groups. Well, not any semblance, certainly. There are biblical reasons why people will oppose variety. In most of the colonies, church and state were united, and only that form of Christianity which was united with the state was permitted. In Pennsylvania and Maryland, though church and state were not united, yet every form of religion was allowed. Rhode Island was the first to have a complete separation of church and state. Moving up the Atlantic coast from the south, one finds that the southern colonies, particularly Virginia, were Episcopalian. The Catholics founded Maryland, the Quakers, Pennsylvania, the Presbyterians, New Jersey and New York, the Congregationalists, Connecticut and Massachusetts, and the Baptist, Rhode Island. We shall look at these in turn. In Virginia, the Episcopalian settled. Captain John Smith was their leader. Thus describes the first church. And we have an illustration here. "When first we went to Virginia, I well remember we did hang an awning, which is an old sail, to 3 or 4 trees to shadow us from the sun. Our walls were rails of wood, our seats unhewed trees, till we cut planks, our pulpit a bar of wood nailed to 2 neighboring trees. In foul weather we shifted into an old tent. This was our church, till we built a homely thing, like a barn, set upon cratchits covered with rafts, sedge and earth. So was the walls, the best of our houses, of like curiosity, but, for the most part, far much worse workmanship than neither could well defend wind nor rain. Yet we had daily common prayer, morning and evening, every Sunday 2 sermons, and every 3 months the Holy Communion. When Lord de la Warre came in 1610, a better church was built, of which we have this account. The Captain General hath given order for the repairing of the church, and at this instant many hands are about it. It is in length 60 foot, in breadth 24. It shall have a channel in it of cedar, and a communion table of black walnut, and all the pews of cedar, with fair broad windows to shut and open, as the weather shall occasion, of the same wood, a pulpit of the same, with a font hewn hollow like a canoe, with 2 bells at the west end. It is so cast as to be very light within, and the Lord Governor and Captain General doth cause it to be kept passing sweet, and trimmed up with divers flowers, with a sexton belonging to it. And in every Sunday we have sermons twice a day, and every Thursday a sermon, having 2 preachers, which take their weekly turns, and every morning at the ringing of a bell, about 10 of the clock, each man addresseth himself to prayers, and so at 4 of the clock before supper. Well, there's a biblical kind of prayer schedule too, which would be a dawn to sunrise prayer. When I'm recording this, it's not quite sunrise. And that would be one time. There'd be early afternoon, late afternoon, and evening, and a dusk. And that's the most common system of course, 3 kind of prayer times seems to have been more common. My stomach's rumbling at the mention of supper. There it is again. Every Sunday, when the Lord Governor and Captain General goeth to church, he is accompanied with all the councillors, captains, other officers, and all the gentlemen, with a guard of halberdiers in his lordship's livery, fair red cloaks, to the number of 50, both on each side and behind him, and being in the church, his lordship hath seat in the choir, in a green velvet chair, with a cloth with a velvet cushion spread on a table before him, on which he kneeleth, and on each side sit the council, captains and officers, each in their place. And when he returneth home again, he is waited on to his house in the same manner. The Episcopal Church was for long the only church in Virginia. George Washington belonged to this church. Delaware was settled by Swedish Lutherans. Didn't George Washington show signs he didn't quite believe in it strong enough to take the sacrament? Delaware was settled by Swedish Lutherans. They had great difficulty in getting ministers from the old country, and even to get word home, but at length they were able to reach an officer of the king with a letter saying, "We do heartily desire that there may be sent unto us 2 Swedish ministers who are well learned in the Holy Scriptures, so that we may preserve our true Lutheran faith. Further, it is our humble desire that you would be pleased to send us 3 books of sermons, 12 Bibles, 42 psalm books, 100 tracts, with 200 catechisms, and as many primers." See, we see the importance in their minds, really, of different types of religious books. You think that the Bible would be the most, if it was the most important. And as many primers, for which, when received, we promise punctual payments at such place as you may think it fit to order, as to what concerns our situation in this country, we are for the most part husbandmen. We plow and sow and till the ground, and as to our meat and drink, we live according to the old Swedish custom. We live also in peace and friendship with one another, and the Indians have not molested us for many years. And that kind of means something different. Touched us in an inappropriate way. Yes, that meaning's there, but basically not bothered. We have always had over us good and gracious magistrates, and we live with one another in peace and quietness, so that we desire, as soon as this our letter comes to hand, that a speedy attention may be paid to our request, for we believe that God has certainly his hand in this Christian work, and pray that he may bring it to a happy termination. Now, a God would be certainly the provider of any means for any good or truth, regardless of what path, right? In response to this letter, the King of Sweden and his Archbishop sent 3 Swedish Lutheran ministers to Dover. This was in the year 1696. Maryland was founded by a Roman Catholic. Lord Baltimore, who wished a place of refuge for those of his religion who were persecuted in some countries of Europe. The Catholic Church, however, was not united with the state in Maryland, and was not the only church allowed. The Catholics were not even a majority in the colony. In other colonies, there were scarcely any Catholics. The great strength of the Catholic Church in the country did not come until later, as we shall see. In Pennsylvania, the Quakers found a home. The state was named for William Penn. He was the son of an admiral of the fleet in England, who was very vexed when his son took off his sword, kept on his hat, and dressed in the plain fashion of the Friends. At the bottom of the page is a picture of American Friends showing their costume. Well, they're functional clothes, too. More functional than people wearing pants that are tighter than underwear should be, and some other things that aren't terribly good for the weather or one's sensual being. But the old admiral disowned his son at first, but could not help admiring him for giving up the case of the king's court to lie in a vile prison. The father had still more reason to be proud when the son so stirred an English jury that, after being kept without food, warmth, or any comfort for 2 days and nights by the judge to make them find Penn guilty, yet on the second morning, tired and dirty, they still came back with the answer not guilty. Admiral Penn put William back in his will, and that was how he came to have the wealth and standing to start a colony in the New World for the Quakers. Now, isn't pride one of the 7 deadly sins? You can be pleased with the development, but that's different, isn't it? In all his dealings with the ones that he considered to be the Indians, he was just. He made a treaty with them, which was never sworn to by an oath and never broken. The only token was this wampum belt, showing the Quaker and the Indian holding hands. Many other persecuted groups in Holland and Germany, such as the Mennonites, Schwenkfelders, and Dunkards, found a home with the Quakers. A letter from a Quaker girl in Pennsylvania to her grandmother in England has been saved. Here's part of it. The demeaning way they talk of young people. It's like when in this country you're called a kid until you're 30, and it's like, but there are children. So they should just distinguish between who's the child and who's of childbearing age in the way they talk. I don't like to call anybody a boy or a girl if they're not, below the age, the stage of life. Dear grandmother, Mama has been writing to thee since last 5th day, And she told me I could put a sheet to thy letter. We want to get it off to the packet which sails from Philadelphia about the 10th of the 12th month. Our new house is at all done. I wish thee could see our big kitchen. It has a fireplace entirely across one end of the room. Papa brings the backlog in with the horse, and when the boys pile wood up against it, such a fire as it does make. We have so much wood. Papa says we would be rich if we had this timber in England. I gather chips. We had a nice time roasting chestnuts this fall in the ashes. I have 4 quarts dried. The new house is built of logs and all nicely plastered inside. Will be good and warm this winter. We have a Dutch oven now. I wish thee could have seen our garden this summer. Besides the rows of sage, chamomile, thyme, comfrey, and rue, with yarrow and some onions, we have great big love apples, tomatoes. They are almost as large as an apple. They grow on a bushy plant which starts from a seed in the spring. Uncle Henry found them last summer among the Indians and brought some of the seeds home. Mamma says they are poison if we eat them. They are just pretty to look at. We have so many horses and cows that are not ours. Papa is ranger now and takes up all the strays. Thee don't know about this, does thee? Well, everybody here lets their cows and horses run loose in the woods. Sometimes they don't come back, and it takes a long time to find them. We heard of a little girl this fall who got lost while hunting for the cows. Dark came on, and she heard the wolves howling. Howling. It was very late when she found the cows all huddled together. Her father found her next morning fast asleep alongside of the bell cow. She was safe and sound. I'm glad I wasn't that little girl. Mamma has school for me every day. She's the teacher, and I am the scholars. I am head of my class. Papa says that if I keep doing that well, he will send me to England to school when I get big. Then I'll see thee, Grandma, and the dear old place I love so well. There's no more room on the paper, so I must stop. With lots of kisses and 2 pats for dear old Rover, I remain thy affectionate granddaughter, Sally Brindley. And, okay, so that probably was a child. In New Jersey and New York, the Presbyterian Church took the lead. The first settlers were the Dutch, whose church, called the Dutch Reformed, is a branch of the Presbyterian system. When the English took the colony over, Lord Cornbury tried to force the people to go to the Episcopal Church. Francis Makemie, the Presbyterian minister, refused, and held his own service in a house. He was brought up for trial and was asked, "Do you own you preached and baptized a child at the home of so-and-so?" "Yes." "How many hearers did you have?" "I got more to do than to count them." "More than 5? "Yes, and 5 more." "Did you have leave from Lord Cornbury?" "Leave was asked for me." Makemie pointed out that the apostles Paul and Peter did not ask leave of anyone to preach. Makemie won, because by this time the laws of England allowed more than one church in the old country, and the colony of New York could not be stricter than the motherland. In Connecticut and Massachusetts, the Congregationalists settled. Some of them had gone from England to Holland. Their children were growing up Dutch, and the parents wanted to go to a place where they could be free to worship God in their own way and rear their children as Englishmen. They sailed on the Mayflower and landed at Plymouth Rock, near Boston. 48 men came. During the first winter, 28 died. Yet, when the ship sailed back to England in the spring, none of the settlers went with her. This was in 1621. Soon more colonists came and settled in Boston, and by New Haven and Hartford in Connecticut. Only Congregational churches were allowed for a long time in Massachusetts and Connecticut. The Baptists were not permitted to settle in Massachusetts, and Roger Williams their leader, was put out partially because he was a Baptist and partially because he had said that the government should not control religion. You know, the people judging their own feelings and emotions to try to interpret the Bible for themselves and be born again and that sort of stuff is bound to have a plethora of churches, like we've found that hundreds or thousands of Baptist churches exist, all different chains, whether they're not even if you include the Southern Baptist Convention or the Evangelical Convention, there's many, many churches that are not part of that list. The government should not control religion. Governor Winslow of Plymouth told Williams to go into the open country and be as free as a Congregationalist and a good neighbor. A better time of the year might have been chosen for such advice, for he was sent away in the midst of a New England winter. He called the town which he founded Providence. Others of like mind founded other towns in the neighborhood. These united to form Rhode Island. It was the first colony to separate completely church and state. Roger Williams secured from King Charles II in England this agreement, our royal will, and pleasure is that no person within the said colony at any time hereafter shall be in any wise molested, punished, disquieted, or called in question for any differences in opinion in matters of religion, who do not actually disturb the civil peace of our said colony, but that all and every person and persons may from time to time and at all times hereafter freely and fully have and enjoy this and their own judgments and consciousnesses in matters of religious concernments throughout the tract of land hereafter mentioned, they behaving themselves peacefully and quietly. And this is supposed to be New Haven in 1786. And as I've said in reciting the scripture of this age, people be free to believe or disbelieve whatever they want, and various things like that.